In 1776, a man's pen ignited a revolution, a declaration that challenged kings and empires. But behind those immortal words, there was a thinker, a farmer, a lawyer, a philosopher, shaping the vision of a new nation. His name was Thomas Jefferson. How did one man born into privilege yet shaped by hardship come to articulate the ideals of liberty that would echo across centuries? Thomas Jefferson, architect of the Declaration of Independence, third President of the United States, advocate for liberty and religious freedom. Yet Jefferson's story is not just of political triumphs. It is a story of paradoxes, of brilliance intertwined with contradictions, and of an unwavering belief in the capacity of people to govern themselves. Born in 1743 in Shadwell, Virginia, Jefferson emerged from a world on the brink of transformation. Europe was still dominated by monarchies. America was a series of colonies under British rule, and the winds of enlightenment were sweeping across the Atlantic. It was a time when ideas carried as much power as armies, and when a single individual could shape the destiny of nations. Thomas Jefferson was the third of 10 children, born to Peter Jefferson, a planter and surveyor, and Jane Randolph, a woman of one of Virginia's prominent families. Wealth and land gave Jefferson privileges, but it also planted seeds of responsibility. He learned early the value of observation and inquiry, walking the fields, surveying land, measuring rivers. These were the lessons of a boy growing in the cradle of the American frontier. Jefferson's formative years coincided with the intellectual movement of the Enlightenment. Ideas of reason, natural rights, and individual liberty were not abstract theories. They were challenges to the world he knew. Thinkers like John Locke argued that governments exist by consent, not divine decree. Montesquieu examined the separation of powers, and Rousseau's writings on the social contract whispered of a world where people, not kings, determined their fate. These ideas seeped into Jefferson's mind, shaping a worldview that questioned inherited power and celebrated human reason. At age 16, Jefferson entered the College of William and Mary. Here he studied law, classical literature, and philosophy. He excelled not just in academics, but in cultivating a mindset of inquiry. Jefferson was known to copy volumes by hand, digesting the ideas of Cicero, Locke, and Newton. He absorbed history as a map of human behavior and law as a guide to just society. Every page read, every essay written, was a step toward forming a vision for his country. Yet Jefferson's early life was not without contradiction. He inherited slaves, benefiting from a system he would later publicly question. He was a man of refinement who also loved the simple life of his Virginia estate, Monticello, a place he would design with meticulous care, reflecting both his intellect and his desire for harmony with nature. Monticello became a laboratory of ideas, from architecture to agriculture, embodying his belief that human reason could shape not only government, but the very land itself. The political climate of Jefferson's youth was charged. The colonies were restless under British taxation. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and growing interference from Parliament fanned the flames of dissent. Jefferson observed the tension keenly. As a young lawyer and legislator in Virginia, he argued for rights rooted not in tradition, but in natural law. He believed that individuals were born with inherent freedoms, rights that no government could legitimately revoke. One early catalyst that shaped Jefferson was the influence of local intellectual societies. Debates in Williamsburg, Virginia, exposed him to ideas on governance, commerce, and human rights. These discussions were more than academic. They were rehearsals for a revolution. Jefferson's writing from this period reveals a mind testing the limits of political thought, exploring how societies could be just, free, and prosperous without tyranny. By the mid-1760s, Jefferson's reputation as a thinker and orator was growing. He combined the rational inquiry of a philosopher with the pragmatism of a politician. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Jefferson believed that government should not only restrain power, but empower people. Liberty was not a distant ideal. It was actionable, enforceable, and worth fighting for. Here was a man ready to challenge an empire, yet he was only beginning his journey. The stage was set. The colonies were stirring. The ideas were in the air. And Jefferson, the scholar farmer, the dreamer reformer, was preparing to put pen to paper and change the course of history forever. By the 1770s, the American colonies were simmering with unrest. Taxes imposed without representation, British soldiers quartered in colonial homes, and the call for freedom growing louder with each passing year. Thomas Jefferson, once a quiet scholar, was now poised to step into history. Jefferson's first forays into politics came through the Virginia House of Burgesses. Here he witnessed the friction between colonial assemblies and imperial power. He argued passionately against the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, championing the principle that no man should be taxed without consent. Jefferson's words resonated with fellow Virginians, marking him as a rising voice of reason and resistance. But resistance required more than eloquence. Jefferson, like many of his contemporaries, grappled with the challenge of unity. The colonies were diverse, economically, socially, and culturally. How could farmers, merchants, and intellectuals coalesce into a movement strong enough to challenge Britain? Jefferson believed that shared ideals could bind disparate groups. Liberty, he argued, was the common ground upon which a new nation could be built. Drafting the Declaration. By 1775, conflict had erupted in Massachusetts. Lexington and Concord set the stage for armed rebellion. Jefferson, still in Virginia, was deeply involved in the ideological battle. In 1776, he was appointed to the Continental Congress. There, he faced a monumental task: to articulate the colony's grievances in a document that could justify independence, not only to Britain but to the world. Jefferson drew upon the Enlightenment principles he had long studied. He invoked natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He framed government as a social contract, a mechanism to secure these rights. And he wrote with clarity and moral urgency, arguing that when a government becomes destructive, the people have the right, indeed the duty, to alter or abolish it. The drafting process was intense. Jefferson worked tirelessly in seclusion, penning and revising the Declaration. His fellow delegates, including John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, reviewed and suggested edits. Yet the core of Jefferson's vision remained: a revolutionary assertion that liberty was universal, not a privilege of birth or class. Meanwhile, war engulfed the colonies. British forces, trained and equipped, faced a ragtag assembly of local militias. Jefferson returned to Virginia to contribute locally, drafting laws, organizing militia support, and ensuring that the principles he wrote about were enacted at home. He also contended with criticism. Some feared his ideas were too radical, others doubted the colony's ability to self-govern. Jefferson remained resolute, believing that education and civic virtue were essential for liberty to thrive. Jefferson navigated a landscape of factions. Conservatives feared disorder, moderates sought compromise, radical patriots demanded independence. In correspondence and debate, Jefferson articulated a vision of balanced governance, a representative system where power derived from the consent of the governed. His philosophy balanced idealism with pragmatism, advocating freedom tempered by responsibility. The conflict was not just political, it was deeply personal. Jefferson's family faced uncertainty, his estate strained under wartime pressures, and his health often faltered under stress. Yet these hardships sharpened his resolve. He understood that the struggle for independence required sacrifices not just of wealth and comfort, but of patience and foresight. By mid-1776, the colonies were ready. Jefferson's draft, once circulated among delegates, became the cornerstone of the Declaration of Independence. On July 4, 1776, Congress adopted the document. It was a culmination of intellectual preparation, political courage, and philosophical conviction. Jefferson had taken the principles he had studied as a boy, the ideals he nurtured as a young man, and transformed them into a call for liberty that would define a nation. The pen had become a weapon. Words, once ink on parchment, now carried the weight of a revolution. Jefferson had faced the challenge of articulating freedom in a world dominated by power, and he had succeeded. The stage was set for war, for transformation, and for the birth of an enduring vision of democracy. The war for independence had been won, but Thomas Jefferson's journey was far from over. The young nation was fragile, divided, and still finding its place in the world. Jefferson now faced the ultimate test: to lead a country he had helped create, translating revolutionary ideals into the practice of governance. In 1800, Jefferson was elected the third president of the United States. His victory was hailed as the Revolution of 1800, a peaceful transfer of power from one political faction to another, unprecedented in world history. Jefferson's vision was clear: a government that respected individual liberties, minimized central authority, and promoted agrarian democracy. He believed the strength of America lay in its farmers and landowners, not in distant bureaucracies or concentrated power. One of Jefferson's most dramatic achievements came in 1803. The Louisiana Territory, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, was offered for sale by France. Jefferson understood the magnitude of this opportunity. He recognized that control of this vast land would secure the future of the United States, providing room for generations to cultivate freedom and prosperity. Yet Jefferson faced a dilemma. The Constitution did not explicitly authorize the federal government to acquire new territory. Critics questioned whether he had overstepped his authority. Jefferson, however, saw the larger picture. He acted decisively, negotiating the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million, effectively doubling the size of the nation. The bold move reflected Jefferson's pragmatic idealism, a commitment to principle balanced with decisive action. Jefferson's presidency was marked by efforts to reconcile ideals with practical governance. He sought to reduce the national debt, cut taxes, and limit government spending. He championed religious freedom, upheld the Bill of Rights, and promoted education as essential for a democratic society. Yet his administration faced challenges. Foreign policy tensions with Britain and France threatened trade. The Barbary Wars tested American resolve overseas. And at home, Jefferson had to navigate the growing political divide between Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Through it all, he maintained a belief that the people's judgment, expressed through civic participation, was the ultimate safeguard of liberty. Even as Jefferson expanded the nation and promoted ideals of freedom, he wrestled with profound contradictions. He owned slaves despite expressing moral opposition to slavery. Monticello remained a site of both intellectual brilliance and human bondage. These tensions defined Jefferson's life, reflecting the complexities of a man striving to reconcile principle with inherited realities. Jefferson's presidency also nurtured his lifelong curiosity. He championed scientific exploration and innovation. He sent the Lewis and Clark expedition to map the Louisiana Territory, collect data on flora, fauna, and indigenous cultures, and assert American presence in the West. Jefferson believed knowledge was the foundation of freedom. An informed citizenry could safeguard democracy, while understanding the natural world could advance human potential. Jefferson's foreign policy emphasized caution and pragmatism. He sought to avoid unnecessary entanglement in European conflicts, navigating tensions with Britain and France through embargoes and diplomacy. His approach reflected a strategic patience. Liberty at home required vigilance abroad, but overreach could jeopardize the fragile republic. By the end of his second term in 1809, Jefferson had left an indelible mark on the nation. He had doubled its territory, strengthened its institutions, and demonstrated that a republic could endure. His presidency was a crucible where ideals met reality and where vision was tested by circumstance, challenge, and compromise. Jefferson's life was now moving toward reflection. His pen had drafted a revolution. His policies had shaped a continent. But his influence extended far beyond borders or office. It was philosophical, enduring, and profound. The stage was set for his enduring legacy to be measured not only by deeds, but by ideas that would inspire generations. Thomas Jefferson's presidency ended in 1809, but his influence did not. Now, in the quiet of Monticello, he turned to reflection, writing, and the cultivation of ideas that would echo long after his passing. Jefferson retired to Monticello with a vision of continuing to shape the nation through thought and example. He devoted his time to his gardens, architecture, and an ever-growing library. In 1815, he founded the University of Virginia, an institution designed to embody the Enlightenment principles he had cherished all his life. Jefferson believed that education was the foundation of liberty. An informed citizenry could preserve the republic and resist tyranny. Even in retirement, Jefferson remained politically active through letters and correspondence. He advised presidents, debated policy, and championed principles of limited government and individual rights. His writings reflected both wisdom and humility, tempered by the experience of leadership and the complexity of human affairs. Jefferson's life was marked by paradox. He was a man who proclaimed universal liberty while owning slaves. He valued reason and progress, yet held deep attachments to tradition and Virginia's landed gentry. These contradictions were never fully resolved, yet they shaped a nuanced understanding of human nature. Jefferson's reflections acknowledge the limits of idealism when confronted with social, economic, and political realities. Jefferson's legacy is woven into the fabric of the United States. His words in the Declaration of Independence, "All men are created equal," became a moral compass for generations of reformers, abolitionists, and civil rights leaders. His vision of a republic rooted in education, civic virtue, and decentralized governance influenced American political culture in enduring ways. Internationally, Jefferson's ideals inspired movements for liberty and self-determination. Across Europe and the Americas, revolutionaries looked to his writings as a blueprint for challenging entrenched power. His influence was philosophical as much as political, demonstrating that ideas, once articulated, could transcend borders and time. Jefferson passed away on July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the same day as John Adams. His death marked the end of an era, yet the principles he championed continued to shape the young nation. Monticello became a symbol of enlightenment, innovation, and the complexities of American history, a place where intellect, labor, and human contradictions coexisted. Jefferson's life teaches the power of ideas and the responsibility they carry. Leadership requires vision, courage, and a willingness to act, even when outcomes are uncertain. Freedom demands vigilance, education, and civic engagement. Progress is always entwined with complexity, compromise, and the struggle to reconcile ideals with reality. Thomas Jefferson's pen ignited revolution. His presidency expanded a nation. His vision shaped generations. And though history judges him with all the nuance of his contradictions, his enduring contribution remains clear. He dared to imagine a society where liberty, knowledge, and reason guided the fate of a people. As we reflect on Jefferson's life, we are reminded that democracy is never complete. It is a work in progress. Explore his writings, debate his ideas, engage in civic life. For the legacy of liberty is not just preserved in history books, it is lived every day by those who uphold its principles.